Good morning, everyone. I'm Peter Catlow from Businesswise Solutions. We are an energy management company based in Nelson, in Lancashire. Chris, I can still see your speaker name on the side of the slide. Yeah, so as I say, we're an energy management company based in Lancashire. We employ 50 people, and we are heavily involved in the green energy market, both from the point of view of negotiating contracts on behalf of our clients, and also from the point of view of helping them to reduce their carbon footprint and on their road to net zero. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the green energy market, where it's going, how it's going to develop, and a few ideas about what you might do to participate in that green energy market at the end. Okay, next slide, please, Chris. So I guess the big story with green energy is the change in the mix of the way in which energy is generated. Coal-fired generation is virtually disappeared. By the end of 2020, it was as close to zero as it can almost possibly be. I think there are one or two coal-fired power stations left operating in the UK, but they only operate at times of absolute peak demand. And commensurate with that has been the rise of renewable energy generation, to the extent that 37% precisely of energy generated in Q4 2020 was from renewables, mainly from wind power. Okay, next slide, please, Chris. So energy, as I've said, is evolving, and it's being pushed both by the marketplace, but also by policy changes. So, for example, all electricity is going to be generated from renewables by 2035, and that's an edict from the Climate Change Committee back end of last year. All new gas boilers have got to be capable of operating on hydrogen or a mix of hydrogen and natural gas from 2025. Next slide, please, Chris. There's going to be a massive increase in offshore wind capacity. 4 times today's level is the forecast, because the government has targeted that we're going to have enough power coming from offshore wind to power every home by 2030. And also there's an auction coming up this year of generating licenses, which will include for the first time onshore wind and solar photovoltaic panels, which will inevitably mean that there will be an increase in the amount of certainly grid electricity that we see from large solar PV farms or from onshore wind farms. Next slide, please, Chris. The one area of energy that's not very green and not much has been done about it thus far has been heat, largely from the heat that we get from natural gas. And the truth of the matter is that electricity has borne most of the taxes and levies that have been placed upon businesses to fund things like the renewables obligation, contracts for difference, feed-in tariffs, and the climate change levy, all of which have provided a fund, a pool of money, which has been used then to subsidise renewable energy generation. And gas has avoided any of these, but it will change. It will change. Gas will become more expensive. It's very cheap at the moment by comparison with even domestic gas in the UK, or certainly on a global level. And the chances are, I think as Miranda mentioned, that heating will move to heat pumps. ground effect, air effect, or hydrogen, or renewable or electricity from renewable sources. So there's going to be a big drive to decarbonize heat in the next 10 to 20 years. Next slide, please, Chris. I think it's worth just saying at this moment in time that there is clearly going to be a major role for hydrogen to play in this drive towards green energy. It can replace natural gas as an energy source, and it can be produced by electrolyzing water. The idea, it would seem, is to use renewable energy, most likely wind, to generate electricity, which will then carry out the electrolysis. You can then either store the hydrogen for use in the gas system, or you can use the hydrogen that you've created to actually power generating equipment. So you can actually drive turbines and produce electricity. It kind of, it acts as a store of energy, which is naturally occurring and with little or no environmental impact. Next slide, please, Chris. So, as I said, it is an environmentally friendly alternative to battery storage, and it kind of time shifts the energy generation, in the sense that if you've got a howling wind overnight, when demand for electricity on the grid is low, you can use that power to electrolyze water, generate hydrogen, store that hydrogen, and then use it at an appropriate time when the wind may not be blowing or whatever it might not be doing. Okay, next slide, please, Chris. I think the other thing that's going to impact this marketplace, the green energy marketplace, is the environmental, social responsibility and governance agenda. This is becoming more and more important, and I think largely as a result of the impact of some events that were not predictable, things like COVID in the last 18 months, things like social unrest in America, the Black Lives Matter movement, things like the activities to looking into the impact of slavery on the UK and the UK economy. All these things carry risks, and so it's largely the financial institutions that are saying to people in which they're invested, well, what's your plan, mate? What are you actually going to do about the environment, about your social responsibilities, and what are you doing about the way in which you're governed? And certainly from an environmental point of view, we saw last year some significant, extraordinary environmental occurrences. I know, for example, that my son, who lives in California, was evacuated for the first time in 20 years because of wildfires. So it brings it very close to home when you're aware that your family are being impacted by climate change and its impact on the environment. On top of that, we saw some incredible flooding in Australia. I read only last week that Australia has currently got, as a result of the environmental changes, drought followed by flood, followed by drought, has got a huge infestation of mice in parts of New South Wales. So, and all these things have an impact. Of course, as far as the green energy market is concerned, the overarching issue in the UK is a legal obligation to achieve carbon net zero by 2050, which might sound like a long way away, but when you appreciate the full impact of what that means to the economy and to the way we live, the way we eat, the way we drive, the way we do everything, is not that far away. Okay, next slide, please, Chris. Large companies on this subject of policy and disclosure. Large companies are already obliged to disclose how much carbon they're using under the streamlined energy and carbon reporting rules, and they have to report. So that's anybody with more than 250 employees, roughly speaking, has to report in their published accounts what their carbon footprint is and what they're doing about it. And the UK is the first country to commit to complying with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures by 2025. And that means that all commercial enterprises in the UK by 2025 will have to report on their carbon and what actions they're taking to reduce their carbon consumption. And that's going to be a very significant change indeed. Okay, Chris, next slide, please. Okay, so what's all this mean for people who are in business? What does it all mean for commercial users? Well, for sure, the cost of energy from fossil fuels will go up. Carbon prices will increase, and the levies will fund the changes in policy and incentivize the move to renewables, for sure. Renewable energy is now cost competitive with fossil fuels. We know that for a fact, and many of our current clients are switching over to renewables, certifiable renewable energy. Gas, as I said earlier, is cheap, but it will increase to bear its share of the cost of carbon. There will be positive discrimination in choosing renewable energy sources as we go forward, because to reflect the actual environmental or the carbon impact of renewables, there'll be a powerful incentive for people to actually choose renewable rather than fossil fuels. And currently, photovoltaic, solar panels are currently the cheapest electricity going. If you've got local generation, if you've got solar panels on your roof, you're probably paying only a quarter of the price that you pay if you were actually using that electricity from the grid or thereabouts anyway. Next slide, please, Chris. So more implications for commercial users. Electricity will certainly be the low carbon energy source of choice. Hydrogen, as I mentioned earlier, will replace gas. Heat pumps for either air, ground or water will play a major role in decarbonising heat. There'll be a lot more pressure, legislation on disclosure at each individual company level, and demand side response, which is the ability of individual businesses, companies to actually re-export power to the grid will play a role in the journey. Things like electric vehicles can be used to store electricity, and you can plug them in and send any surplus electricity that you've got from your battery back into the grid and get paid for it. So there's a lot going to happen in that so-called demand side response piece. Next slide, please, Chris. So, this is kind of what I'm calling a call to action. So these are the things that everybody pretty much can do. You can commit to renewable energy. There's no cost disadvantage, and prices will fall in the future as more capacity comes on board, and as the pricing, government policy prices will cause the end price, the wholesale price, to fall. I would seriously consider photovoltaic, solar panels for local generation. It's cheap to install these days, and the paybacks are quick. Typically, I don't know, a year and a half to 2 years, you get your money back, and then you've got very, very cheap electricity. You can choose electric vehicles. Businesswise, I've got a scheme running now whereby employees can get a soft loan from the company to buy an electric vehicle We've got electric vehicle charging points in our car park, which are free to use for employees. So there's stuff like that you can do. One thing that we find as well is that a lot of people don't really know where they're using electricity. They've got a supply meter, and that's it. I can think of one client who's got 1 meter and spends 2 million a year on electricity. And before we were able to help him, he had no idea where that electricity was being consumed, and was surprised when we were able to point out exactly where it was being consumed. So if you can find out exactly where you're using your energy, you can put in place actions to reduce your carbon footprint. If you don't know where you're using it, chances are you're probably not going to do much about it. You can decarbonise your heating. I mentioned heat pumps. By 2025, you can use hydrogen in your boiler if you have a new boiler, etc. And also be prepared for strict laws on disclosure. It will apply to everybody by 2025. So there's going to be a lot more compliance required by that time. Okay, next slide, Chris. So questions, if there are any, I guess.
Hello, everybody. We're back on. I don't see anything in the Q&A just as yet. And there we go. So I spoke too soon. Somebody was just typing it through.
Agreed.
Can you see that, Peter, as well? Yeah.
Yeah, I've just seen it. Yeah, I agree with that comment as well, by the way. Yeah, I didn't have it on my list, I agree. But yes, I understand, Eugene. Okay. Yes, I agree with that comment.
Oh, fantastic. See, that's what we like to see. Everybody on the same page. We've got one from Rachel. I don't know if it's, I'm not sure what's showing on your screen, Peter, or whether you're able to navigate by your own.
I can read them, yeah. Rachel's asking, as we change from natural gas to hydrogen, is there any scheme support from government? At the moment, the answer is no. Yeah, at the moment the answer is no, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was some support for the change. The government seems to be very keen on this use of hydrogen as opposed to natural gas.
It does seem, correct me if it's any different, Peter, it does seem that at the moment it's more on a national infrastructure level, isn't it? Also not national, but in pockets nationally, to see whether they can bring the infrastructure up on a national level. And yeah, then I suppose it comes down to, then it'll come down to the nitty gritty of subsidies for kit and so on that obviously heats our homes and whatnot.
I think, yeah, I mean, we're a long way from if you read the Committee on Climate Change's view on hydrogen, which seems to be, they seem to envisage a very large role for hydrogen going forward. But as you quite rightly point out, at the minute, there's little or no supply and little or no demand. Yeah. So it's going to be a sea change on both sides of the supply and demand equation to actually make it happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a big infrastructure issue and a question as to who actually is who's going to take responsibility for making those changes.
Yeah, I mean, the further afield, there's hydrogen networks, isn't there? The hydrogen economy and networks and clusters up in Humberside, a little bit closer to my home. They're looking at using the infrastructure that's in and around Northwich, aren't they, in the salt caverns and things like that, and then that'll fund over sort of Stanlow, Ellesmere Port, Port Sunlight and so on. I think that's where they're looking at doing some of the tests, but again, that's all big, heavy industry as it stands, isn't it?
And it's not green either. For the most part, it's not being generated from renewable energy sources.
Yeah, it's about 90% is, well, it depends which way they want to spin it, but it's, comes under classification as grey hydrogen, doesn't it? Because it's, being split from fossil fuels rather than electrolysis.
Correct. Yeah. And so Rachel said to me, that's our biggest use at 5 out of 6 sites, so we want to change where we can. Okay, what I suggest, Rachel, is maybe we could take that question offline and see what we can do to help you if you'd like to do that. Chris, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still there. Yeah, sorry, I was just wondering whether Rachel needs to return on that one to see whether we will have everybody's details. Yes, so the team that set it up behind the scenes for us, our brilliant girls in marketing, and Darren as well. They'll have all those details where obviously we can make sure that we've exchanged if everybody's happy with that by the looks of it.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Fantastic. Let me just scribble on the corner of this post-it note. Fantastic. And just let me have a scan over the questions, listen to what's answered. I think that's pretty much it, unless anything comes in as I'm just sort of closing up, Peter. Unless there's anything else you feel you need to add. Say thank you very much for your time again. You're always, as one of our partners, you're obviously heavily involved, but it's always nice to have you speaking for us.
No, thank you very much. I think that truly what we're about to see here is a revolution. I don't think, certainly not in my lifetime have I ever seen anything that has the potential impact that this heading towards carbon net zero will have. It will be absolutely dramatic, and I think some people are only just figuring out, even some of the larger companies are only just figuring out what the true implications of all this are. Yeah, so unfortunately, I probably won't live to see most of this, but never mind. It's exciting times going forward.
I'm sure there's plenty of time and plenty of fighting as well, Peter. Don't worry about that.
Right.
I suppose the pace, as you say, obviously from your presentation, the pace of change is happening so quickly. Like, I mean, that will be on flying saucers, but I think we'll definitely see some dramatic changes. I think you'll be fine.
Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic.
Well, I hope so. I hope I see some dramatic changes.
Yeah, okay. Well, and hopefully we'll be both there together at the same time, Chamber Low Carbon and BWS. So thank you very much for your time, Peter.
Okay.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully some of that is sat looking at the remainders. But if not, whatever you're up to, have a good day.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Fantastic.
Cheers.
Sit down now. Bye.